Okay, so do you want to just give some background into your current role?
So I'm a sports physiologist employed by the South Australian Sports Institute. So it's the oldest state sporting institute in Australia. And so at SASI, I work with their swimming program, which currently have 5 Olympians, including the current 100-metre champ. And I'm also seconded to the Australian cycling team. And for the majority of this Olympic cycle, I've worked with the men's track endurance program, which have broken a couple of world records, the women's track endurance program, and now with the delay in the Olympics, I'm actually working very closely with the paracycling team for the next 12 months.
Oh, that's really exciting. Have you worked with para athletes before?
Oh, I have, yeah. It's they're a good group of people.
Awesome. So yeah, how have they all coped like during the whole lockdown situation and things?
I guess in South Australia, in Adelaide, where I am, we've been extremely fortunate that our case rate has been quite low, and we've actually been almost 3 weeks without any new cases now. But on the day of the Olympics postponement, I was actually with the swimmers, and the emotional sort of toll of that announcement hit pretty hard. And that's probably the main thing that sort of affected all the athletes, is that, you know, they've been so fixated on something that was only 4 months away, and now it's potentially 15 months away.
Yeah, I know for me that was a big struggle, because you have one goal and then it's taken away, and for me we have no races for probably another year, so it's tricky.
Exactly. I guess with regards to training, the athletes have been quite fortunate, given that we've had a lot less or a lot lighter restrictions than Europe have experienced, or the US. So the cyclists have been able to pretty much train on the road as they normally would. The swimmers, we had a couple of weeks out of the pool, but we've got pool access now. We're actually the first squad in Australia to get pool access. And yeah, I guess the only limitation was gym access. So we sort of had to shift equipment out of our central gym to athletes' houses.
Yeah, well, that's cool. At least they had some options for training and stuff.
For sure.
It's cool. So yeah, so in the HIIT Science course, you worked on the road running and the road cycling. Do you still work with road runners now, or what role do you have there?
Yeah, so road running, I guess that's, at the moment, it's a personal hobby. There are runners at the institute. We've got Jess Trengove, who's a two-time Olympian, but yeah, I don't work with her directly.
How do you incorporate HIIT into your training? Like the principles that you discussed in the course?
Yeah, me personally, or with the athletes that I work with?
You personally. Well, both, but yeah, you personally with the running.
Okay. With the running, I guess it's a chance for me to explore and experiment with a relatively low risk in terms of I'm not potentially damaging any Olympic champions. But I guess my philosophy is, I guess, to think about the adaptation and the outcome, and work backwards from what the race or the competition demands are. And I guess toward the beginning of a preparation, you sort of target more general underlying physiology. And then as you come closer to the event, you do more specificity in terms of the efforts. In relation to the athletes I work with, I guess in the Olympic sports system in Australia, it's very much a coach and support team model. And so I guess I have to work within the coach's philosophy in terms of how I help them prescribe various HIIT formats. Okay,
cool. And do you mostly work with elite athletes, or do you have some who are kind of developing?
So in my time at the institute, I've worked across the whole board. At the moment, I'm predominantly working with Olympic only athletes. But over the last 6-7 years, I've worked with emerging and developing right all the way through the pathway, essentially.
How does the training change? Do they end up doing more higher intensity, or does it just depend on the athlete?
I guess it's very context specific. You have to consider each of the athletes' requirements and their situation. I guess at the elite level, you'd say would be the most extreme end, where you're really trying to tax them and find new ground. Whereas with developing athletes, you want to build the foundations and expose them to the various challenges that they will need to develop, and expose their various physiological systems so that they're ready to do more strenuous and extensive work.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, so in addition to your coaching and stuff, you also get involved with research. So do you have like, what are you working on at the moment, or what have you been working on recently?
In terms of research?
Yeah.
Yep. So I've got a PhD student. He's submitting his thesis in 5 weeks. So for the last 3.5, 4 years, we've been investigating the application of heat stress for elite athlete preparation. So yeah, we were quite lucky to have access to, as an example, the track endurance squad before they broke the world record at the Com Games. And we monitored their training, and that will form part of his thesis. But I guess the underlying story with his thesis is the application of heat stress and how it might enhance aerobic adaptations.
Which athletes is he working with? Did you say the cyclists?
Yeah, so Sam, my student, he was working with the athletes that I was working with for that particular case study. So we sort of worked together on that project. And we've done a couple of other more mechanistic studies with local, A or B grade cyclists in Adelaide. So, yeah.
That's cool. So is he nearing the end of his PhD, or has he still got more research to do?
No, he's 4 weeks away from submission. So
nice. Good place to be.
So he's scrambling to get all the writing done and getting it all formatted up.
Yeah, it's the worst bit. But yeah, that's cool. Good place to be. Yes, yeah. Do you have any other research that you're working on, or planning to do?
Yep.
Or would like to do?
Yeah, for sure. I've got. I'm involved with another student in Sydney. He's also working with the New South Wales Institute of Sport cycling program, and he's looking at determinants of performance and training in track cycling. So that's one aspect which is quite different to pure physiology, I guess. It's more holistic in what are the key training stimulus that benefit track endurance performance. But as I guess working with coaches and having to problem solve every day, you always are coming across questions that you think would be good to be answered. So hopefully we'll have some more students at the Institute soon.
That's cool. It's never ending. That sounds good. Good place to be again.
That's right. So
yeah, so you were saying that you train kind of like more like a lifestyle athlete, but what goals do you have?
So I've done 2 marathons up to this point, and I've done 2:32 both times. They're within 5 seconds of each other. So I've got to go under. My goal at the moment is to go under 2:30.
That's cool. It's a good goal. So do you just run, or are you doing other things as well?
I ride my bike a bit as well. On the weekend, I went out with the track boys, and they did 250k. I'd only managed 230. And a month ago, I did 300k on Zwift because I felt bad for everyone in Europe.
Oh my word! Wow. Yeah, that is completely outside of I think I struggled with 10k the other day. So yeah, got a long way to go.
But like Paul, I came from a triathlon background, so doing one sport or 2 sports seems quite easy.
Okay, fair enough. We've got a few questions coming in. Shall we try and answer a few of those?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So one here. What is the benefit of SIT work compared to long, short aerobic intervals for a steady state type event such as the marathon?
Yep. So I guess that again depends on the context of the athlete. So if you're an athlete that knows that they can run the marathon distance or whatever the event is, and you've gone down the more traditional longer and shorter HIIT style metabolic sessions, then potentially you might want to try and increase your ceiling in terms of your maximal sprint speed. So I look at it as if you're raising your ceiling, then every speed below that is actually proportionally less. So you've got more room to move. So psychologically, it's nice to know that you can run fast when you need to, and if you can prepare yourself to be more efficient running faster, then I think it has definite benefit at submaximal intensities.
Sure. Okay. So I've got a question here. How did you implement HIIT when you were trying to run your marathon?
Yep. So I guess I went back to, so I guess starting my first marathon, I hadn't been doing much running. I'd done, I think the 6 months before I started, I was averaging about 25K a week. So I had one goal, was to try and build my volume, which you need to get through the marathon, and then integrating the HIIT on top of that. I guess I wanted to hit each of the key physiological targets. So I went through a 4-week cycle where I'd do some, on the first week, I'd do a HIIT session that would include long and short intervals. The second week would be long intervals, and the third week would be longer intervals. And I'd rotate through that. And as a second session of the week, I'd modulate the terrain that I did a HIIT session on. So one of my favorites was I'd be about a 7% incline on a grassy hill. It was about 100 meters. And I'd do 4x4 minutes with 1 minute passive rest, where I'd sprint down the hill and then run back up the hill and do that for 4 minutes. So getting quite a large neuromuscular load, over speed work, over cadence, but also a high heart rate and aerobic response.
It's nice. Do you incorporate hills training into your athletes' programs as well?
Yeah, with the cyclists, I guess going up a hill is one form to change the stimulus. Typically, you incorporate lower cadence or cadence manipulation on uphill gradients, which I guess taxes the neural system a bit more, and it increases the force demand and the force generation characteristics of an effort.
Okay, and also you were mentioning just there that you were working on a 4-week cycle. Is that something that you also do with your athletes, or is that just something that you were trying out for your own training? A
bit of both. So I guess there's so many ways you can do it. I used to actually go on a 3-week cycle, but for the context of that particular period, I was going with a 4-week block. I guess with the athletes, it depends on the time in their season. So at the moment, one of the groups is actually going on just a purely, we'll go until the athletes get tired. So they're up to week 5 now without having a deload week. But typically it's usually, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, or 2 weeks on, 1 week off, that sort of structure.
Okay. And how you were saying that till the athletes get tired, how are you monitoring that at the moment? Like what monitoring techniques do you use?
Yep. So I guess I utilize heart rate and heart rate variability. That was my PhD. So that's one tool. Another tool is some daily wellness metrics. So sleep duration and reported sleep quality, fatigue, and other life stress. So I guess in combination with knowing what the training context is, then you can have a good conversation with the athlete or with the coaches around how that reflects what they're observing, and if there's enough red flags, then we as a team react to make some modifications.
Okay, that makes sense. I've just started to do the heart rate variability stuff, so I'm about 2 weeks in. So we'll see if it can help me out. It's good. It was a suggestion by Paul, so yeah, we'll go with that one for now.
Yeah, awesome.
So question here. So how long should HIIT sessions be for endurance events like the marathon?
I guess coming back to what the goal of HIIT is, it's to target key physiological adaptations. And so if you're targeting VO2 max, for example, then once you go beyond that 15 to 20 minute time period, then you're actually not able to sustain that intensity. You start to fatigue. So I guess when you think about HIIT for longer events, you think they're there for a specific purpose to to target those key physiological adaptations. So, you know, I think the general research guidelines suggest, depending on your level of training, between 10 and 20 minutes of time accumulated at a high intensity. And obviously the key is to lay that and sequence that with the other aspects of your training, which might be more specific to prolonged endurance.
Okay, so you gradually build that into the training and just gradually progress it as the training goes on.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Answer another question now, which is cool. Yeah. So here, what HIIT format do you use the most in your context? And I guess you've got cycling and swimming, so in each of those contexts.
We use all of them. I was just thinking about all the different target types we use. Yeah, if you're familiar with HIITscience.com, target types 1 to 6 we use in all the programs basically, and I guess the number of each of those particular ones is dependent upon the time in the season and how close that is from the competitions.
Okay, so I mean, at the moment, I guess you can play around with a few different things, working on,
for sure,
I don't know, or whatever. So at the moment, do the swimmers and cyclists have any races planned, or do they know when they're going to be racing next?
No, so I guess the swimmers, we found out last week that World Short Course has been postponed. I think there's potential for some virtual racing, or we might even just create some time trial events and have them videoed or whatever. So there's a bit of competition within Australia. The cyclists, I guess there is Zwift racing. It's very different to real racing. But again, it looks like in Australia we might be able to race on the road again later in the year. So I guess, yeah, they've got something to aim for. But obviously in all those groups, the Olympics are on their mind, and that's the primary goal.
Yeah, for sure. So with that, are they, as you don't exactly know when they'll be racing again, how do you adapt the training to fit with that kind of uncertainty?
Yeah, so that was a very good question. It's particularly at the beginning of the whole lockdown period in Australia. We just didn't know how long and what level of restriction we would have. I guess the first priority, one for the swimmers, was to keep them ticking over, but give them something that was low risk in terms of foreign land-based activities. Because I guess as a swimmer, you're at increased risk if you're doing weight-bearing activities. But still try and tick over their cardiovascular fitness. And I guess we were lucky, within 4 weeks we were able to access some form of water, and they could get back into the water. With the cyclists, it was a big opportunity to do stuff that we typically don't have time to do in a season, like just building a base for an extended period. Typically we'd get 2 months to do that. Now we've probably got 5 months, so you can sort of be a bit more cautious and just build the consistency.
That's cool. Yeah, I've taken much longer with my training to build that base, which is good. So you get the consistent training in, but I just don't know when to start like properly training back to normal. But we'll just have to see how things go.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this question's kind of linked. So someone's asked, what testing protocols do you use when training cyclists to monitor their adaptation to training? And then how often are they performed? Yep,
good question. I guess I'm lucky that I've got access to laboratory facilities. So in the Australian system, there's a test called the 2-in-1 test. There should be some papers on it if you Google it. But essentially, it's a step test. That goes to around about your anaerobic threshold. So typically 5 by 5 minutes. You get a 20-minute rest, and then you do a 4-minute max test or time trial after that. And so with that, you can get a lactate curve, VO2, power relationships, and assess your training zones from that. If you don't have access to that, which we haven't had for the last couple of months, there's a multitude of tests you can do on the field. So the other week, the guys went out, they did a 5-minute test and a 20-minute test. And I looked at some heart rate power relationships to, I guess, estimate what their thresholds were.
Okay, that's useful. Yeah, because a lot of people obviously don't have access to testing facilities and labs and stuff. So that's definitely useful.
For sure.
Yeah. As a coach, what's the main difference between running and cycling in terms of HIIT programming?
I guess the number one consideration is running is weight bearing, and you experience a lot more impact forces, I guess, through the tendons and joints. So I guess with cycling, you might be, you're more able, your body's more capable of doing, say, a block HIIT situation where you're doing consecutive days of high intensity interval training work. Running, you have to allow the tendons and joints to recover a little longer. So typically it would be rare to do 5 days, for example, of HIIT training in a row for running. It's just too risky.
How many would you normally implement? Like 1 to 2 sessions a week, or just completely dependent on the athletes?
Again, yeah, completely dependent on the athlete. I guess in all the groups, it ranges from 1 to 5. If we're going to, with cyclists, for example, if we're going to do a block HIIT periodization, or whether they're doing sort of a mini tour, you can classify, 5 HIIT sessions in a week. But typically it's between 1 to 3 across the sports, 1 to 3 or 4. Yeah.
And then, so to kind of assess how many, whether it's 1 to 3 or 4, how would you determine whether an athlete was kind of ready to do a few more or to pull back? Like what would you be monitoring? Would that be the heart rate variability, or do you use other things?
No, that's definitely one component. I guess you look at how they're performing in the sessions that they're currently doing. So as an example, if they're doing 2 HIIT sessions a week, you look at their power or their speed and heart rate response to those sessions. You look at how they recover the next day, whether they're good for the next day or does it take an extra day. And then, yeah, if they look like they're responding and they're actually improving week after week, then you might think, okay, they're ready to add another one in. But I guess it's all about observing the response to the stimulus.
Okay, I just got a question here. So if someone, for example, if a runner was incorporating cycling into their training, so if they're a triathlete, or if they were just incorporating it because of the lower impact, would you suggest that the cycling is used predominantly as the kind of low intensity things, or would you incorporate some HIIT training into the cycling too?
I think you can do both. So I definitely do that myself. My personal preference based on the sensation is that if I don't like doing too much intensity on the bike if I'm getting close to a running race, just because my legs feel different. I'd rather focus on the running. But in terms of physiological response, like I think you can at certain times definitely go for it on the bike. And I've definitely done that in the past. I guess coming from a triathlon background, I was sort of used to that. But I think, again, it comes down to the context of when you're going to race next and the other training that you're able to do. So if you suffer from limited volume running, then adding some bike stuff is definitely a smart way to increase the aerobic load.
Okay, and I guess now is kind of a good time, considering there's no big races coming up, it's a good time to kind of try it out. So
Exactly.
But yeah, so I mean, running out of questions, but do you have anything else that you kind of got top tips for people who are training for endurance events right now, either swimming or cycling or running?
Yep.
On how to kind of maintain their training or the athlete's training without the kind of a goal that's set?
Yep, I guess you can always race against yourself, like it's a classic time trial situation, or with Strava you can chase segments. So this is probably a time when Strava segment hunting is probably appropriate. Typically you wouldn't go down that route when you're in a proper serious competition build-up phase, but I guess if you've got months till a competition and you're in good nick, and you want to challenge yourself, then there's no reason why you wouldn't go and scope out some segments and chase them.
Okay,
you can be
I've got
specific.
got a few more questions coming in now. Okay, so what methodological advice would you give for coaches using heart rate variability or heart rate?
It's more complicated than it would seem on face value. I guess the trap that many new practitioners to heart rate variability monitoring fall into is they see a number and they don't relate it to anything else. So as an example, I always relate heart rate and heart rate variability together. And it's the changes or the trends in those two variables together with the other contextual factors which allow you to assess the adaptation. If you just say, oh, heart rate variability is down without knowing what the heart rate is or vice versa, then it makes it very difficult to make a good assessment.
Okay, and also I guess you need a bit of a baseline in place before you can start making any kind of inferences from that.
Exactly, yeah. So
yeah,
I
my
guess
3 weeks, I probably need a few more.
For sure, and you need good data as well. So if you put good data in, you'll get good interpretation out. If you're a bit slack in terms of how you do it and your protocols, then you're going to get a rubbish interpretation.
Okay, so yeah, in that situation, would you get the athletes to measure that, and then obviously the coach or the sports scientist or whoever's in charge would then be the person that's like, okay, this is what this means, and then you'd communicate that back to the coach or the athlete?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the structure. I've worked it as me being the primary assessor in most cases. In one squad I work with, I've upskilled one of the assistant coaches, so they'll look at the data regularly, and then if they have a query on an interpretation, they give me a phone call. And if it seems to be something serious, then I definitely go back and look through the data, and we have a discussion as a coaching group.
Okay.
But in most instances, it's around prompting a conversation with the athletes.
Yeah, because I guess if you've got to, like you said, you've got to consider everything. If it's just the heart rate that's changing, that could be something to do with the way they're measuring it or whatever, couldn't it? So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question about nutrition. So how do you see nutrition practices being used in your sports around HIIT?
For sure, that's been quite topical recently. So I guess there's the whole periodized carbohydrate intake story at the moment. So I was quite interested in this myself. So I actually got my student he's an Ironman triathlete. So I got him in the lab doing some intervals, and we did a block of 4-minute intervals at a set power output. And one day he did it with high carbohydrate availability, and another day he did it low carbohydrate availability. And so we looked at the metabolic costs of the O2 usage, and I guess all the other factors like heart rate and rate of perceived exertion, and clearly nutritional status plays a big role in terms of how you feel while you're doing a HIIT session. And can also potentially change the signaling or adaptation responses that you would get from doing the session.
Okay, so in terms of if he, for example, with the nutrition, if he was feeling worse, was he still performing worse, or is it just the
so for the same, for sure, yeah. So I guess for the same, so the power output was the same in both conditions, but the RPE, his rating of perceived exertion was 14 or something in the carbohydrate availability state, and it was close to 18 in the low carbohydrate state. So I guess when you grow, yeah, very big difference. And I guess, yeah, when you're getting toward the end of a HIIT session and you're just groveling away, you have to think about whether that was the right decision based on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Do you use any kind of nutrition practices in your athletes in general, or is it more up to the athlete to decide that kind of thing?
No, we provide quite a lot of education around nutritional practices, and at certain times of the season we may go for a periodized approach. At other times of the season we might use caffeine or bicarb to supplement training and competition. So I guess because nutrition is such a key modulator of how you feel during a session and the potential outcome, it is something we consider as part of the training prescription.
Okay, we'll do one more question because I know it's late with you. So okay, so this is about concurrent training, which I know is a tricky issue for a lot of people. So how do you protect a road cyclist's ability to generate power, for example in sprinting, when they are typically performing a volume-based training program?
Yep, it's a very good question. I guess most of the cyclists I work with are track-focused cyclists. So gym is a a relatively large component of their training compared with pure road cyclists. But as a road cyclist, there are ways that you can protect that. So doing accelerations from a low speed or a high speed will help improve your force generation characteristics, and I guess that ability to accelerate, you always sort of want to touch on, I guess, even if you're doing bulk Ks, because in the end, it's the first person across the line, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I guess for sprint cyclists, they are all about the power, so they'll be doing lots of power and gym and stuff, and less volume. But yeah. So for example, for triathletes, how do you manage that in that situation with the concurrent training? Last question.
Yeah. I guess triathlon is a bit more of an extreme event where you sort of 20 to 30 hours a week potentially for some people of training. And it's managing the overall fatigue with your gym incorporated into that. So as much as I'd like to propose that you do, sets of 5 or like heavy strength training all the time, like I know that that's physically almost impossible. So I guess you have to be a little bit more targeted around when you do that. So you might chase a block at a certain time point where you've got less volume to build that up, and then maintain it using like bike specific or run specific or swim specific resistance modalities.
Okay, that makes sense. It's cool. But yeah, so we'll leave it there. And if there's any other questions that pop up, I'll try and get them answered at some point. So yeah, but I'll let you go because I do know it's late.
No worries. Good to talk.
Cool. You too. Thank you very much.